welcome to the climate talks here in Bonn. I've got Boeve with me from 350, and we're going to discuss a little bit about the levels of ambition that we're seeing here in this process, and also connecting it to the Gulf oil spill that's still underway in the US. And perhaps that's a nice place to start, because I know that 350 organised a big day of action yesterday in the US. How did that go?
It went very well. It was actually the largest single day of protests that have happened since the oil spill. There were 500 total in every state, and it was a combination of candlelight vigils of people really calling for solidarity and support of Gulf residents, and calling on the U.S. government to really do more to respond, and not just stopping drilling, but truly creating a plan to move away from fossil fuel dependence. And so the events went very well, and I'm excited to see some more photos here in Bonn.
And obviously, the kind of here in Bonn, lots of people are talking about the oil spill. I doubt very much that many people in the Gulf are talking about Bonn. What's the connection?
It's a great question. I think the connection is really about the role of the U.S. here at the UN negotiations. And it's well known, I think, that the U.S. is kind of a major stumbling block towards real progress at these talks. I think that from Copenhagen, many people around the world were paying attention to President Obama's actions and kind of coming in and just sort of demanding an outcome in Copenhagen that the U.S. would agree to. In many cases, that's not what the rest of the world wants. And so what we truly need is a political mandate to U.S. negotiators in Bonn that they can do more than what they say they will. And I think the oil spill, and specifically the way the public has reacted to it, is the kind of political space that we need. It's creating the political momentum that President Obama can then give a directive to the negotiators here and say, I think things are changing in the U.S. I think Americans are ready for something more aggressive that's truly going to move us beyond dependence on fossil fuels.
And I saw in one of the newsletters that's distributed here, the Climate Action Network reporting, there's been a poll in the US that shows the majority of citizens are actually against offshore drilling now. And this is kind of clearly something which could be used to leverage green future, green technologies. And yet, how does that relate to US ambition here at the talks?
Well, I think, first of all, the polling didn't only say Americans are now opposed to drilling. It's Americans are in favor of aggressive action to combat global warming. So what we really need is comprehensive climate and energy legislation. And because of the spill, we may see that as soon as July. And once that happens, that is, I think, the breakthrough moment that a lot of people in the U.S. are waiting for, so that we can come here in good faith and actually negotiate knowing what the Senate will agree to. But I think more than that, it's a whole tone of the talks and the whole sense that there's a lack of trust between parties. And I think if the U.S. can actually put its actions where its mouth is, and not only say we're serious about combating this problem, but we have the legislation to back it up, that's what I think needs to change.
And I think our viewers have just been watching an interview we ran with Salim Al-Hook earlier this week, and he's saying that the US is really, it's the sticking point on this talks. Unless we get legislation through in the US, it's going to be difficult to move forward. So clearly this is a real opportunity to push things at the international level.
Yes, absolutely. And I don't think it's the only thing that can make progress happen, but it will certainly, I think, open a lot of other doors.
And currently the US has a target of 2 degrees. This is what it's proclaimed that this is, the ambition that it's looking for. The Copenhagen Accord, this kind of very controversial document that came out of the last climate summit, said, this is what we should be aiming for. And yet, actually, when the pledges came in, when the emissions cuts pledges came in, it didn't add up to anything like that. So where do we stand on that? Is 2 degrees doable? Is it acceptable? Or what's the situation here?
Well, for questions like this, I really like to look to the scientists and then those who are most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. And there is predominant agreement between both of those groupings, scientists and people in islands and in vulnerable parts of Africa, that actually 2 degrees is too much warming. And that when we see warming levels of up to 2 degrees, the models predict widespread drought, widespread sea level rise, and really irreversible damage. And so that's why you see more than 100 countries here at the UN endorsing a target of keeping CO2 levels to 350 parts per million. That's where our campaign draws its name. Corresponding to that, keeping warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is, significantly less than 2 degrees. But also, I just sat into a briefing yesterday all about the feasibility of reaching 1.5 degrees. And to me, it's a question of not, can we reach 1.5, but what awaits us if we don't? And I think that keeping that message really predominant here is very important. That's why we're focused on this part of the talks that focuses on a scientific review process. Because what good is an agreement if it locks us into a target that's not actually going to get the job done in terms of stopping climate change? So a robust scientific review is really vital. That's something that we have our eyes on here, and something that we're trying to report back out to the public.
And I think the presentation you're referring to yesterday was at Bill Hare, looking at the feasibility of 1.5, and we actually spoke to him as well afterwards, and that's an interview that I'm sure we'll be able to run again today. He seemed optimistic in terms of whether it is technologically possible, economically possible. He was firm, it's doable. On the political side of things, he was more cautious. What are the developments here? Do we look like moving towards a 1.5 degree target anytime soon?
I mean, as usual, developing countries are showing leadership on this issue, and developed countries, especially mine, are pushing back. And I think that, we can change politics, we can't change chemistry and physics, and so that's why we're working very, very hard on organizing. And that's really, we do a little bit of work here in Bonn, but the majority of our work is grassroots organizing back in home countries. And so, for example, we're building towards a global work party on October the 10th, which is a day intended to showcase that people all over the world are taking this issue very seriously, and they are implementing practical solutions. So on that day, we're going to see brand new community gardens, new solar panels, new bike paths, all these solutions. And then the message is get to work. So we'll say, okay, well, we're getting to work in our communities. What about you, Senator so-and-so? What about you, negotiator? And I think it's those actions and that continued pressure on politicians, unless they're scared that not acting on climate change is going to hurt them in an election, they're not going to do anything. So our movement has to be louder and put more pressure on politicians. That's when we're going to see the move towards ambitious targets.
And this day of action, of course, will come before the talks in Cancun. This is the kind of end of year, the big climate summit in Mexico. What are 350 looking to achieve there? What's the kind of what's the goal as far as the movement is concerned?
Well, our strategy is trying to take away the excuse from politicians that they don't have any pressure on them. And so that's why this day of action is before Cancun. So we can go in there and safely say, you can't turn to us and say no one's telling you to change, because we have massive evidence from all over the planet that in fact people want you to do more. So that's a large part of our strategy. I think the other elements of what kind of agreement we're looking to see, what I'm hearing from people who have been at many more COPs than me is looking for a set of critical decisions that are made in Cancun, but that are not just small technical things, but really on the dramatic issues. So how is the finance being provided? How are the targets going to be met? What is the legal form? All of these issues need to be dealt with in Cancun. And I think, it's important to note that Cancun sits on the Gulf of Mexico. So come December, we are still going to be looking at a Gulf of Mexico that's polluted by oil. It's a tragic but very powerful symbol for COP16 about the consequences of us just sort of talking and not reaching agreement.